What's up, Active Lifers? Welcome back to the Active Life Podcast. I'm Dr. Sean Pastuch. I'm your host, and today's guest is a throwback. One of my favorite people to follow on social media is Zach Even-Esh, and he's coming on the show today. One of the reasons I love following Zach is because he's like a walking Rocky movie. Everything this guy does, it's like he's just got dropped into Rocky 3 or Rocky 4, and he's responsible for making sure that Rocky Balboa gets in shape to win the fight. I love following him. He's pure. You can't doubt at all anything that he says in regards to whether he truly believes it or not. Zach is a throwback of a coach who I hope that we have many more of in the time to come, and that's why I wanted to bring him on the show today. Enjoy. Zach Even-Esh, welcome to the Active Life Podcast.
What's up, my bro?
I'm very excited to have you on, man. We talked about this years ago and we had trouble lining things up because of your wrestling coaching schedule and me owning a business that was consulting with other businesses during COVID. It was wild, but here we are.
I know. I need, I'm not a full-blooded entrepreneur anymore. That's the problem, And so when you're a full entrepreneur, you've got that. So yeah, I coach full-time at a high school, strength and conditioning, which started the year of COVID, or like I was at the school I'm there 3 years. So I was at that school for like 4 or 4.5 months. And then COVID, I haven't had a normal year there yet.
What made you decide to go back and do that?
Well, coaching to me is really my love. So from 98 to 2009, I taught at an elementary school. In 2002 or 3, I started training athletes. Actually, 2002, training them out of my parents' garage. 2003, bought a house, redid the garage to train athletes. And when kind of the strength and conditioning started, in those early 2000s, it was pretty rare for somebody to do it full time. And my online business was really making a lot more money pre-2012, I think, because I was just like the new guy. Mm-hmm. And so in 2013, I was brought up to Lehigh University. I didn't know they were quote unquote interviewing me. I thought I was just coming up to like show them stuff, and I trained guys preparing for the Olympics and guys, they're better wrestlers. And I fell in love even more so with coaching. I remember kind of getting like tired of, you do a lot of the business consulting, and I just saw this massive explosion in the internet where you don't really need to be a great coach, but if your video editing was great on YouTube and if you were ripped and shirtless, like that changed everything. And I think at the time, so I'm 46, so, 10 years ago, it's always like, oh, I wish, YouTube was around when I was like bodybuilding and training in all these ways because my YouTube would be so big. And so for me, I felt like coaching is this almost like honest way to prove to myself what I'm doing works, to connect with people. And I get cabin fever. I cannot spend too much time behind a computer. And so 2014 coached at Lehigh, 2017 for a year and a half coached at Rutgers. And I was like, if I'm going to be online, I've got to be making multiple six figures. You and I live in the Northeast, very expensive areas. You're in a beach town. I'm in a beach town. It's expensive. And so I said, I want to coach. And like, to me, it's the purest thing I can do, meaning to get my online business successful, I now need to hire somebody to run paid advertising. That's, $1,000 a month of ads, $1,000 a month to get them to manage. Whereas to me, it's like coaching is you're just proving it right there. Mm-hmm. So I hate kind of all that other behind the scenes stuff that is required now to make people notice your online stuff. But that's the game. That is the game. And if you want to win the game, there's two ways to win it. You got to go all in to dominate, or you don't play the game at all.
It's funny. First thing is I've made a post several times that says the best coach in the world probably has less than 1,000 Instagram followers.
Yeah,
and
probably.
Because like the person who's just number one, never focused on anything except for coaching. Like you, like me, we had a divergence where we went and did some other things, and then we came back to some kind of coaching. And now part of the value for me is actually putting it onto the internet. But the best coach in the world probably never did that. They probably just are still coaching Georgians wrestling.
Dude, there's actually a lot of coaches very much under the radar, and even some are not under the radar. But like, for example, in 3 weeks, I'm doing a seminar with Tony Villani, who's a co-owner of a facility in Florida. Tony and his partner, Matt Gates, they produce some of the fastest men in the NFL. And like, here we are still like struggling to get people to sign up. And it's like so cheap. I laugh because when I was, 20 years ago getting into this, if I could like get to somebody's seminar, I often was driving somewhere. I always share a story of how I drove. I went to a Juan Carlos Santana seminar.
I remember him.
And I can't remember if it was done through Perform Better or through him. And it was at his place in Florida. And so what I did was called out sick on Friday and woke up at 5 a.m. and started driving by 5:30 and drove all day and all through the, 18 hours or whatever. It took me 16 hours to get to Florida. Did his seminar Saturday, Sunday. Sunday, I left a little early. It was like 20 years ago. So I either left at like 3 or 4 p.m. and it must have been a little bit earlier. I got home at Monday at 3 or 4 a.m. I had to go back to work to teach, normally wake up at like 6:30. So I slept like 2 hours, had a protein shake, and then went and taught elementary. And then after that, I was coaching athletes out of my garage. And I remember like driving all day and through the night and sleeping 2 hours and still working, coaching. And today it's like, I'll go to, I know there's like different areas of Long Island, but you're in an area, let's say I go to another area and it's like getting a call from you, Zach, let me know when you're in my area.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Sean, I flew here from California to coach this seminar in, Long Island. And you're like, well, if it's not in my gym or in my backyard, I'm not going. Mm-hmm. And so the internet really made people lazier. And so a lot of these great coaches, we don't know about them because I don't really know why. It's quite an interesting game, but I've been connecting with a lot of great coaches recently, kind of under the radar. And it's enticing me to redo what I did in, I think I did it in 2010, maybe it was 2009. I did the Underground Strength Conference, but this time I'll call it the Underground Strength Gathering. But these guys are such like amazing coaches and they're killing it in their gyms, but they don't have like a big online following or anything like that. Like some of them are making 6 figures. Some of them are making multiple 6 figures, but they have like 300 Instagram followers.
Right. Right.
And it's like, you could, the truth is not what we see on social, as we always say, right? So behind the scenes, these guys are killing it, and I love it.
When we were doing seminars, we would release the schedule for the year, and then people would be like, "Oh, when are you coming near me?" And my answer to them would be probably never.
Yeah,
like it's either important enough for you to come to this seminar wherever it is,
yes,
or it's not. And we have the same thing all the time now. We have coaches who sign up for our education who live in places where their currency is like. They're buying our education with a full 1.5 years, 2 years worth of salary.
Right.
And then there are people in the States who are like, I don't know, it's, I want to save up and have it. And I'm like, I get it. I get it.
I get it. Yep.
It's just a totally different mindset.
You're like, when see the hunger is so different. And I think we have access to everything. If you want to, like, who do you work with? PTs or chiropractors or both?
So mostly coaches, gym owners, and people who haven't been helped by coaches, gym owners, or doctors.
And sometimes people have gotten like coaching from others, but it's just so complicated. It's almost like organized to fail. We have to simplify it.
Yes.
But I think the access to everything, like a podcast, I used to have to pay to listen to audio interviews with other coaches. And now we give away our best information for free. Mm-hmm. And a coach actually emailed me like a couple months ago. He's like, I listen to all your podcasts and I bought your business course. He's like, what's interesting is like, if you listen to every single business course, you could get this information. He's like, but people don't want to do it. And it's that internal, do you have the discipline to sit down or whatever, walk or drive your car as you listen to the podcast? But then do you take action from these like 1, 2, or 3 takeaways that you got from a podcast? Otherwise, to me, you're literally just wasting your life away. And so I think that's my advantage over others is I've always had this like weird concept of time where I really understood that it's the one thing you never get back. You lose money. I could build another business. I could hold a sale. I could get on an airplane and do seminars. I could do a lot of things. If I lose time, it's never, ever coming back unless, the flux capacitor is, Back to the Future becomes the thing that we can have access to. And so whatever I do, like I've got books all over my desk, but when I read something, I'm like, all right, now you have to take action. You have one day to take action. Or if I buy a book, that's $10. I gamified it long ago because I was nervous to invest. Like what you mentioned, these other people, I gamified. I said, okay, you have to make a 10 times ROI within 30 days. So here's a funny story. It was around 2009 or 2010. I went to Joe Polish's 25K weekend in New York. It cost me $10,000. I think it was like a 2.5 day event, like an evening and then 2 days. And so I was like, boom, $10,000. Before I even got there, I created a strength coach mastermind. And I think it was like within the first week, I, made like 30 something grand. Mm-hmm. And just by investing in the seminar that I didn't even attend yet, it inspired me. It like put me on the hook, skin in the game to create something. And I can't remember exactly. I had like put together a PDF and shared it with coaches who had gone through my certification. Here's the mastermind. We're going to meet 4 times a year. We're going to meet at this hotel in Edison, New Jersey. We're going to have 2 guest speakers at every event. I had a buddy of mine come in. He's a former Navy SEAL. I had Tom Venuto come in, who I think created the first ebook in fitness, Burn the Fat, Feed the Muscle. Vince Gabriel, who does a lot of stuff. So it was interesting. Like I just took immediate action, and people complicate stuff, everything. It's not as complicated as they make it. Even training, I always say, like, if kids would just watch Rocky 3 and copy that, we'd have some real strong and fit and tough kids. Like go running, do curls, do a lot of push-ups. And, I think he did military presses and sit-ups. It's not, that's not a balanced program. What about the posterior? You just start working like that. And that, to me, see, that's what I'm saying is like, we want this big course before we do anything.
Well, they would also see that Rocky got knocked out when he was focusing on the camera too much in Rocky 3.
Yeah.
In Rocky 3, the first half when he's training for the first fight against Mr. T, Clubber Lang. And it's like,
Mickey told him,
pose him for the kiss.
You got civilized. He goes, that's the worst thing that could happen to a fighter. And there's a lot, a buddy of mine always says to me, this guy was a great wrestler. He's like, people don't realize that Rocky is a movie, but it's really not a movie. He's like, it's real life. And he's saying that for real. This guy was an all-American wrestler, a state champ wrestler. And it's just that like training, that discipline, that focus, you got to take it for business. You have to do the same in business.
Well, so you said, all right, one of the reasons that I wanted to interview you.
I'm jumping around a lot.
No, you're good.
About ADD.
No, but you're good. It's good. It's good. Because you actually still where I was going to go, which means we're right on the same wavelength. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is if I had kids who were interested in sports, they would come train with you. And I would feel as though I was the most fortunate parent in the world to have my kids under the stewardship of Zach Even-Esh. Right? That's the truth. I first learned about you maybe in 2006, 2005. My wife's uncle was taking your underground strength certification.
Yeah. What's the name? Do you remember?
Kevin was his first name. I don't remember his.
Where was he from?
O'Brien, Kevin O'Brien.
Yeah.
He was from the DC.
Kevin
area.
came through the first certification, maybe the second. He was a firefighter in Maryland.
Yes.
He created a outdoor gym. I know he had gotten divorced, right? So I guess that was that your, who'd you say, your sister? Or
so my wife's aunt's husband. So
Gotcha.
My wife's
There you
aunt
go.
is the ex-wife of Kevin.
Yes.
But I learned about you through Kevin.
Yeah, dude. So he came up and listen, those early coaches were so hungry. And speaking of that hunger, I forgot to say, I don't know if it was his seminar, but it was one of the early ones. Two guys flew over from the UK. They stayed at somebody else's house like 25 minutes away, who was also from the UK working. I don't know how they knew each other, but there was a lot of like guys coming from like that area of the UK running these big soccer camps. Do you remember Rover soccer camps?
I think I do remember those.
I don't know if they were like just in the Northeast or kind of across the country, but that's where they stayed. And there were sometimes people that would show up to the cert because they only had enough money for the flight, and they'd get there, and then kind of like around the lunchtime, they'd be like, does anybody have a hotel room where I could sleep on the floor and I could give you $20? And people were showing up from out of state, on a plane without a place to stay. They were ready to stay. People would ask me to sleep on the gym floor. How hungry is that?
Yeah.
Sleep on the gym floor. Hey, I'm not driving to Dr. Sean's seminar unless it's in my office. Like, what? You see the difference?
Yeah, 100%.
So
and I've,
funny.
the reason why I'm saying that I would be so privileged to have my kids come and train with you is I've seen the way that you handle having your own kids. Not only the ones who live in your house, but the ones who other parents send your way. It's this level of, we're not going to make excuses, and I'm here for you. That like when married is so valuable. So how does one start to think about doing that for the people who they service? The idea of like, I imagine everyone who comes to you knows, I'm not going to tell Zach that I'm dogging it today because I didn't sleep last night. Zach's going to ask me, why didn't you sleep last night? I'm going to tell him I was out with my friends. You can say, well, then was going out with your friends more important than having a good workout? You were going to have that conversation.
Oh yeah.
But
this
at the same,
is simple,
right? But at the same time,
yep.
If something goes wrong for my kid in their life and they come to you, you're going to be there for them.
Check this out. This is interesting. And I had a different concept of it before I had my own two kids. So my daughter is 16, my son's 14. And all of my coach, I don't want to say all of them. One of my coaches at one time, I had closed the facility right after COVID stuff, but she was a mom. But long story short, when I see a coach not like putting his or her heart into it, I go, here, imagine this. Imagine you have a son or daughter in this group training and you're on the outside looking in. What do you want to see? What do you want that coach, doing with your kids? Do you want them to stand against the wall? Do you want them to check their phone every 5 minutes? Do you want them to have poor energy, low energy? Do you want them to only have a good day when they're having a good day outside of the gym, or they argued with their girlfriend or their husband or whatever, and now they bring it there? Do you only want them to talk about training, or do you want them to discuss life and, the relentless pursuit of excellence in everything that you do? So what kind of coach would you want your own kids to have? And I need you to be that coach. And that takes some grit, meaning years and years ago, one of the coaches I trained, he grew up as a kid in my neighborhood. He was the first kid I trained. He became a member in the house, in the gym. Then he became a coach for me. And one day him and his girlfriend broke up, and he was like depressed for the whole week. And it was noticeable over his face and the energy that he brought to the gym. And I was like, dude, you know, I understand that that hurts. I've been there before. But when you're here, you have to take that and put it in your back pocket. And now it's the kids' time. It's not about you. Not that they don't care that you're going through something tough, but that's not their problem. That's not anything that they need to address. That's something that you're going to work on, and we could go out to eat afterwards and, you know, talk about these things, but it's the kids can't have it. And that's not even a business thing. It's just a life thing. And so I'll say to athletes I train at my school, hey, you're yawning all the time. I don't yawn when I'm here. You're giving 80% today. You want 80%, Coach Even-Esh? You want 80%? And that's how I look at it. And maybe that's the wrestler in me that's been coached about work ethic and to not only work up to what my feelings are, because there's times where I'm tired, no doubt. But I look at it like, this is somebody's child. What would I want my own child to experience? And let me tell you, it's really hard to find great coaches like that, because my kids are in baseball, tennis, basketball. They've done swimming, you know, soccer, all these sports. And you just want somebody to pour their heart into it. But I want to say this too. There's a lot of people that don't really grasp what we do, and they will go elsewhere. They will pull their kid out, maybe because it's closer, maybe $50 cheaper. Maybe somebody told them about something. And look, not every kid I train becomes a champion. And it's not because we are messing it up. And to put the responsibility on them, they don't eat properly. They don't, you know, train the sports skills. There's stuff they don't do that basically cancels out what we do. So sometimes as a coach, things are just out of your control, but I could control my effort. And so to me, my advice to coaches is pretend you're coaching your own children. What would you do, or what would you want for them? Because anything I say to a kid, even if it's tough, is exactly what I would say to my own kids. That's the truth.
I believe that. And I would also say that, you know, just because somebody comes and trains with you doesn't mean that they have any guarantee that they're going to be a champion.
Yeah.
Right. It's
the
like,
truth.
Even if they do everything right, they might just come up against somebody who's better. That happens too.
We have less champions in my gym, you know, like sport champions than we used to. And I'm 100 times smarter than I was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. My training is better, but we're just not getting that high caliber kid. Kids that sometimes are high caliber don't even want to train with a coach. They just want to do their own thing, or they fully immerse in the sport and don't want to do strength and conditioning. So the business has changed for sure.
So you said you're 10 times smarter than you were 10 years ago. What is something that you used to think was valuable to do that you no longer do?
In training or in business? Or
let's go in training.
My training was extremely intense, but the kids were emotionally ready for it. I was also super intense with the kids. Now I do what Brett Bartholomew talks about, which is like being a chameleon for each kid. Not that I didn't have that, because I think one of the biggest assets and skill sets I had was coming from the elementary physical education world as a teacher. You're working with kids, you know, different kids respond differently, but our training was way harder back then. The focus of training was very much strength and conditioning. And the reason being is the athletes were athletes. They were athletic. They could do pull-ups and push-ups from day one. I mean, it wasn't odd for kids to do like what I would consider an advanced movement. You know, now we have kids, I'm talking high school kids, who can't do a push-up. So they're starting off way behind the 8 ball. So now my training is very much like sport performance athletic based, because they're lacking athleticism. I've mentioned the de-evolution of athletes quite often in my writing and the way, you know, I podcast. I'd say up until 2010, 2012, the athletes I trained, I actually just had a conversation with one of the kids I trained who became a coach for me, who then coached at the Division I level. They were football players, but they played pickup basketball. When it was warm and when it was cold, they went to the YMCA to play pickup basketball 2 to 3 days a week. They all played 2 sports a year. I get kids who just do one sport. I actually had a dad text me for speed and agility for a 5-year-old. Yeah. And it just goes to show you, like, man, the world, even with all this information out there where we talk about long-term athletic development and kids playing multiple sports, I still get the question every effing week for a 5-year-old. I haven't never had a 5-year-old, but this was a 5.5-year-old. I've had a lot of dads of like 7-year-olds for speed and agility. I didn't need to do speed and agility 10, 12 years ago because they were playing basketball.
Right.
Or they went and did things like they would go to the hills and run hills. One of the kids, when he went to junior college, joined the track team so he could learn how to run.
That's what I did in high school.
Yeah. And so he was a football player, and the junior college doesn't have football in New Jersey. So he joined track. And then when he went to a 4-year school, played football. And I remember him telling me, he's like, Coach, I wear the Underground Strength gym shirt under my jersey all the time. He's like, because it helped me get through the toughest times. He didn't have a good relationship with his dad. He was struggling at the college. He said they deadlifted every single training session. He's like, my back was effing killing me. He's like, but nobody really understood why I had so many Underground Strength gym shirts. He's like, I wore that shirt and it like gave me like superpowers. Mm-hmm. And I started learning. I don't know when I learned it, but you kind of was like, how I coach kids. I started learning like, I'm not just coaching kids to win. And that's also what I used to do, by the way, Sean, was like anything I spoke to kids about was about winning. Now I really speak a lot about life and taking the lessons from training and sports and applying it to life. And it probably or certainly started when I became a dad. So that's 16 years ago. You mentioned Mike DeMarco. That was like 2009. I started training him. He was a Division I athlete. I probably spoke to him constantly about winning and dominating. And sometimes kids need a break from hearing that stuff.
Do you miss talking that way, though?
Oh, yeah, dude. I miss looking around the room and being like, that's a state champ. That's a state champ. That kid's going to play at Johns Hopkins. That kid's going to go play at, Penn State. Or, it was like everywhere you looked, it was like one champion after another, after another. And I miss that. I miss how parents would drive an hour away, 45 minutes away to train out of my garage. Mm-hmm. I live in a little beach town. I don't know if we're 2 square miles or 1 square mile, but you could ride your bike here. Kids who live 5 blocks away get a ride here. And as soon as they get busy, their parents stop training them. He's got to stop. And I'm thinking to myself, my daughter's tennis is 45 minutes away. On game days, she does a tennis private at 6 a.m. before high school. At high school, we hit the road at like 7:10 to get her to school. So we do a 6 to about 6:45, 6:50. She does a private. That was her idea, not mine. And I'm like, where do I have these kids anymore that want to be great? And what else I miss was people back then. My prices were actually higher pre-2010, pre-2012, because what we did, I think, was so rare. There weren't really other places doing it. So I think the scarcity of it, people had a higher perceived value. People did not have that kind of money. And it was like $350 a month to train. Mm-hmm. And people were pulling up, dads were pulling up in like old beat up pickup trucks, finding that money to help their son get this advantage in sports. And then of course I had, people with money, people pulling up with a Mercedes or a Jaguar or a Ferrari or a Land Rover. And those people spoke different. In Edison, we trained, That was the first location, Central Jersey, kind of right on the border of North Jersey. We trained either blue collar kids or kids that were coming from a lot of money who still had this blue collar, tough work ethic. So we had parents that were they were in the financial or banking world. We had other parents that we had one family that like the family was in the mob. Like we just trained all different kinds of people, but the work ethic, that was a special place. It's, I'm not equating it to Westside Barbell, but I've shared with other people that I think Louis Simmons died of a broken heart because his early group of Westside Barbell guys were tough and group oriented. And then all of a sudden they argue with Louis, and now somebody opens another powerlifting gym, and everybody's opening a gym, and now they just want to go. They don't want to be told what to do. And I want to go here and I want to go there. And we had such a tight knit group, like guys became friends and then would, host parties together. Or when they got to college, they would travel to go to the other guys' parties. We had such a tight knit group. Today in our world of overabundance of sports, nobody has time. And so like yesterday, I was at my daughter's tennis tournament, and somebody was getting like a private volleyball lesson on the tennis court. And I'm thinking to myself, we can't just go and play volleyball anymore. We need to have a coach. Or I can't play basketball anymore. I have to go to a basketball club. I need a coach. I have to go to AAU. And it's never going to go back because everything has been like, business. It's just turned into a business with everything. And so we don't see kids playing in the streets. I'm in such a small town, and the basketball is so good in this town. I've been here 12 and a half years. I've never seen one pickup basketball game at the park. Never.
It's so crazy you say that because I had a similar experience. When I was growing up, we used to go to a place called Merricktown Park if we wanted a game.
Yep.
And if Merricktown Park was too crowded, we would go to Prospect Park, which had a similar game with kids from a different town. And these were like, close to fist fights almost every time,
street ball,
right? A real fist fight every once in a while, but competitive basketball games. And I wasn't a great basketball player, but it was like, that's where you go to learn.
That's how you get better.
It's yes. And Cal Ripken Sr., I don't know if you've ever heard of the way he talked about when people ask him, like, how did you get two kids playing pro ball? And he's like,
no, I never heard this story.
They just told him at the end of baseball season, we put the glove in the trunk and we lock it, and it doesn't come out until it's time for baseball season again. You're going to play other sports. And
I love it.
What they learn, what kids learn from not being so rigid and structured and like measured and there's a time for, I want to get your thoughts on this in a moment. There's a time for measurement and there's a time for play.
Yeah.
And play can also be training, but it's like, we're just not putting you under a microscope today.
It's so organized. It sucks.
So
as a dad, I think it sucks.
I'm with you. And I'm in some way fortunate. I have 3 daughters who haven't expressed much interest in sports yet. So I don't have, I'm not going into like, what is this guy doing? But how do you, like, when is it time to measure? And when is it time to just fucking do it? Like, just go.
I like that.
Do it.
That's also what I miss about early days was we didn't track anything. Mm-hmm. Now, I get it. You're tracking stuff. It has a lot of merit, especially if you're a field athlete. Like I know a lot of high school strength coaches. They track miles per hour of the athletes. Mm-hmm. They track like distance run. Then they could correlate it to injuries, which allows you to communicate with the sport coach and maybe say, coach, listen, during this football practice, they've already ran 2+ miles just in practice. And, our miles per hour average per game is down about 10%. So, if it's all right with you, I suggest we don't run gassers anymore, right? The whole, the down and back of the because that shit is a conditioning drill, not a speed drill. So it allows you to have better kind of ammunition to back up what you're talking about, or maybe to, like, for example, I think Miami has a lot of injuries, football, and Twitter was like blown up yesterday of like, hey, that's because they're practicing too much, too hard. They're tackling too much. So they have data, right? But you mentioned like,
talking about the Dolphins or University?
University. Okay. Yeah. University. Cause they lost to University of Middle Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And if you've been seeing, like, I don't follow football enough, but it just pops up on my Twitter feed that these smaller schools are getting paid to come and play at bigger schools.
They always have.
The big school is supposed to like shut them out. So I think it's like sometimes like $1 million, 800 grand. Mm-hmm. So the Twitter like memes are really funny. You know, they're like people dancing, like, give me my money. And University of Middle Tennessee was not supposed to beat Miami, but I think at the halftime it was like 21-3. Then the end of the game was like 46-31. And they said the score, you know, looks kind of close, but they're like, Middle Tennessee destroyed Miami. And they shouldn't. Notre Dame, 2 weeks ago, I think lost to Marshall, something like that, which is a good.
I don't remember if it was Marshall or Alfred, but it doesn't matter.
It's a good school, but they're not supposed to lose. Notre Dame, is like world renowned. They're not supposed to lose to them. And then I look at like the best wrestlers in the country. They're training in what looks like a prison weight room, or they're running hills and there's no monitor. And so here's where that comes in. You need the coach's eye, and that takes a lot of time. And that also takes a lot of time of training yourself, meaning, can you look at somebody, trap bar deadlifting or doing cleans, and you're looking at the technique and the speed of the movement, and that with that athlete, just by, looking at him or her, that if you add a 5 on each side or even a 2.5 on each side, it'll deteriorate their form and or make the movement too slow to have a good transfer of training. Because hey, this athlete's only been here this long, so they don't have good power or strength endurance. So after that one hard set, we probably need to do a down set. You could see it, you could see it with your eyes. And I think a lot of coaches don't know how to do that. I want to start using more testing tools because it's part of the business now. It's going to help me grow the business. So, what's a 40-yard dash time for this athlete? What's their flying 10, flying 20-yard dash? All that stuff helps. And it lets you also see, is what I'm doing really working? Because if you're only testing how much weight is on the bar, some kids could lift a lot of weight, but they can't move in sport. But some sports, there's like a no correlation. I could improve your 40, I could improve your vertical jump, but if you didn't get better at swimming, the skill of swimming, or you didn't improve the skill of baseball, the skill of wrestling, it's like, yeah, I'll help you, but the most important thing really is the skill. And so when do I think we need to do it? Those things I like to call them like a silver bullet, right? The silver bullet was used to kill a werewolf. You have one of them. You don't want to use all your silver bullets in middle school. You actually even want to wait and use them intermittently through high school and maybe a little bit more in upperclassmen, because 6 or 7% of your athletes will compete in college. And then out of that 6 or 7%, from what I've seen, 50% of them quit. So now you're down to the 2 or 3% that really stick it out. So you can utilize testing to maybe do a trial, to do some sort of an assessment. But I don't like doing it all the time, because then we're not training. We're just constantly trying to improve these numbers. And I'll tell you what, that doesn't train the mind.
You jumping, you're beating me to it every time, man.
I think you have to train the mind, because in sports, you need that grit. I think, for example, not to boast on my daughter, she actually struggled a lot this past summer in tennis. She's a sophomore, but she's she turned 16 a month ago. So she's been entering the 18 and under tennis tournaments. So I get it. You're losing to 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds who have a little more experience. And now yesterday this whole weekend, she had a tennis county tournament and she took third, but she was not seeded, meaning she was not expected to place. So on her first match, she had a pretty easy win. Then her second match, she beats the 4th seed. And then she beats a 3rd seed. And it's like, you're not supposed to do that. But I've been watching, like I mentioned, I wake up early anyway. But on match days for her school, we're going to the tennis club, the local one, 5 minutes away, to do that private. And as much as she hates waking up early or the night before, she's like, I think I want to sleep in. I'm like, you'll regret it, because you'll be uncomfortable for 2 to 3 minutes when you wake up at 5:30. But then you're going to get that tennis private and it's going to boost your confidence and get you better prepared. And so all these little things you do that can build the athlete's confidence are probably more important than all that measuring stuff. Because if an athlete does not believe in him or herself, it will negate all the, most scientific preparation you have done. And I think it's a little bit more applicable for athletes in combat sports because they need that grit, that toughness, but it's needed, in tennis. It's needed in volleyball when you're tired and your legs are wobbly, but oh no, we did 20 jumps today. We can't jump more than 20. Really? Because in a volleyball game, these girls are probably jumping 100+ reps in a game. So you need to get away from perfect, because competition is so imperfect. And then, of course, you have the unfortunate realities that there can be a serious accident, a devastating injury to an athlete. And so if everything is so perfect, their body may not be prepared physically, and their mind may not be prepared, right? The psychology, the emotional readiness for when these games kind of, you go to a away football game and the crowd is, booing you and cursing at you and making fun of your mom. I mean, legitimately, I see that happen. Or you get like maneuvered into like a poor position, but your training is so perfect. And I think that hurts kids in several ways.
So there's a few examples here that I wrote down that I wanted to bring up. One of them is, how familiar are you with Gino Auriemma from UConn women's basketball?
Oh yeah. Amazing. I love what he stands for. I love that guy.
So I did his masterclass. He has a the masterclass courses. Yeah. It was really good. But what he looks for when he's recruiting athletes isn't how fast do they run, how high do they jump, how well do they shoot. It's something goes wrong, how do they handle it? Right? So he's looking at like, your team didn't get the call and your coach had to call timeout to break momentum. What does the person I'm here to recruit do with their body language, with the way that they bring their team together? Are they the person who sits on the bench and sulks, or are they the person who brings everybody together and reminds them we control what we can?
He'll lose a game before he allows a player with a bad attitude to get back, because, and I'll tell you what, like working at the high school, that's how coaches get fired, or that's why kids transfer out of schools now. Kids with bad attitudes who don't get playing time, their parents complain. And then that coach could get reprimanded because administration's not going to stand up for the coach.
Because that kid donates.
That's right. The dad's like, I'll just go. We'll transfer out. We'll go to a private school. And so there's that video of Gino where they asked him like why he kept his best player on the bench. He's like, because she had a bad attitude. And he's like, if you have a bad attitude, you won't play ever. He goes, ever. He goes, I will lose a game before I let that bad attitude in. And I've done that in my gym where I will, kick you out. I'll give you chances. But if you are a battery drainer and you are not following through, I look at it as you're wasting your parents' money because you refuse to eat or live the lifestyle or sleep, or put an effort here or schedule your workouts or show up prepared. You show up in flip-flops, You don't have sneakers, so we can't take you on a run. You're never scheduled. Every time you have 5 excuses as to why you couldn't schedule, which takes 5 seconds from our app. That just keeps showing me that you're not ready. And how can I get somebody ready with, coaching them like a baby? Mm-hmm. Eventually you got to tell people, listen, man, you got to get your effing shit together. And this is what this means. You need, on a Sunday, you need to schedule your entire week. You need to know what your academic schedule looks like. If you have big exams on Wednesday, then don't train Tuesday. Make sure you're organized. What are you eating for breakfast? 2 protein bars? We've told you that is just a candy bar in disguise. Your breakfast needs to be one of these 3 options. If they don't follow through on stuff, they're telling us through their actions that they don't want it. And this is not good business. I know it's not good business, but I will remove that person from the program.
I think that is good business.
Well, people tell me all the time, like, keep the money. So what if they don't want to follow through? Listen, Sean, this is also why I coach at a school, because I want to be able to be coaching in the purest form, where it has nothing to do with like the money. Of course, I'm getting paid a salary at this high school, but I want to just have the purest form of coaching. I think the ultimate purest form is like when you're making so much money, like Mark Smelly Bell. And he told me way back in the day when he didn't have money, actually, he's like, a dad wanted me to train his son. And the dad was like, what does it cost? He's like, it's free. He's like, the reason why I do that is because nobody can own me. You can't say, hey, I paid you money. You have to do this, or you need to be here at that time, or any of that stuff. And I have a little bit of that. Like during COVID, people's salaries may have gotten reduced, or they lost a job. And then they'd be like, Zach, is there any way we could get a discount? And they're not keeping in mind, like, sure, I'll give you a discount, but wasn't I closed for like several months? And, we're both kind of in the same boat here. So I'll say, hey, if it's a struggle, I'll just train you for free. Because if it's really a struggle, do you need to drive a Jaguar or a Land Rover and you're worried about $100 discount or some shit like that? And what I'm telling them is, let's cut the bullshit, because you're worried more about a car than, $200 for your son. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to embarrass you and say, then I'll do it for free, because I was out of business. What's that?
Did they take you up on it ever?
Oh yeah. People they just don't. And you know what? I'll do it for free because I'm doing it for the kid. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they learn a lesson that, and I gotta tell you something, like $200 is nowhere near the monthly, athletic, quote unquote, training bill I have for my own kids, between baseball and tennis and traveling and going to hotels and driving up and down the East Coast. And by the way, if it was, and I wasn't an entrepreneur, then I would simply get another job. I would figure it out. And so that's another lesson I want kids to take, is you got to be tough in this world. And, speaking of cars, look, I have a Toyota 4Runner. I love that truck. And I'm so sold on it because it's got like 230,000 miles and people think it has like 30,000 miles. But I will never get a expensive anything that puts me in a place where I have to say, can you give me a discount on my daughter's tennis, on my son's this and that? Because that's not, it goes back to, I think, wrestling. I was not trained to ask for some sort of shortcut. The shortcut to me is through the work. And we're in a different world now. Everybody's like, don't work so hard, work smart. There has to be an element of hard work if you want any modicum of success. I mean, I don't really know anybody who's achieved something big by being lazy. It's like very, very, very rare.
Well, I think part of what you're describing there is the people who would say work smarter, not harder, probably worked really, 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 really hard to learn how to work smart. And sharing that kind of a lesson with people is valuable because it has someone who is overworking start to evaluate, how do I ultimately and eventually,
I've overworked myself. Yeah.
Right. But what gets lost is no, you have to work really hard to figure out how to work smarter, because you got to work dumb first. You got to do
that wall.
Yes. You got to do all the things. And like, I don't need to do this anymore. Another example from Gino that I always found interesting is he talks about how do you measure immeasurable things. And one of his drills is at the end of practice, they have everyone makes it drill. So what it means is practice ends when everyone has made whatever the task is. And he'll line the girls up and they'll say, okay, we're going to shoot a free throw. That's it. Everyone has to make their free throw for practice to be over. And he's like, and I'll tell you what, some of the best players in the world, they make the free throw when they're in the first four. They do not make the free throw when they're in the last four. He's like,
so the pressure?
Yeah. He's like, so now we know who is not going to be on the court in the last 2 minutes of the game and who is.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. That is interesting. Yeah, because that guy, Tim Grover, he always says like pressure is a privilege. And so I've been really like talking to my daughter about that. Like, don't worry about who's ranked, who's seated, or what their ranking is. I was like, I want you to get excited to compete against people who are quote unquote supposed to be high level. And after being around sports, my whole life, I've been able to witness many moments of the guy winning who was not at all even supposed to be there, let alone win. And so I started learning that the training could be mediocre, but if the person has the gift of self-belief, that athlete or that business person or fill in the blank can really achieve high levels of success, because self-belief, high confidence is like a secret weapon.
Well, and I think so much of that comes from training that gets unmeasured. So I'll share with you. I was a below average wrestler in middle school and high school. And the only reason I wrestled is because I didn't make the basketball team. Okay. So I was like, I'm making this basketball team. The kid in front of me on the wrestling team took 8th at high school nationals. And I'm like, I'm not beating this kid. And I'm 103 pounds. So where am I going? Yeah. Right. And yeah. Biggest regret in my athletic life was giving up wrestling for basketball, but there's a story here. I finally made the basketball team my sophomore year of high school, and I made it because I was fitter than everybody else. And in tryouts, you weren't getting me off the court. I wasn't taking a water break. I would guard the next man up. I was winning the 17 drills, which is like sideline to sideline 17 times in a minute. And it was that kind of training. Like when we went into a game, I took that mental edge with me. No one else has trained as hard as I did.
Preparation builds confidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some people who are lazy are just going to be confident because they're kind of crazy, but they're outliers. That's a 1 in a million. Yes.
Have you watched the Facing Nolan documentary?
No.
I think you would like
Nolan
it.
Ryan?
Yes. Yes. So he pitched until he was 46 years old.
That is insane.
Yes. But so when he was like 41 or 42, whatever it was, I don't remember the age, I'm going to butcher it. They started using the baseball pitch count. Right. And he was like, a pitch count? Get out of here with that. I'm in my 40s. I've been pitching in this league for 20 plus years. You're not going to all of a sudden start managing how many pitches I'm allowed to throw. But were guys really breaking down that much in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s that we all of a sudden now a guy can't throw 100 pitches in the game? That's the end of it. I feel like we get to the point in sport and in development where we understand that like there's some correlation with these metrics and these breakdowns. Yeah. And then we just forget that sports are inherently unsafe. We're supposed to be pushing the boundaries in sports. And ideally the training makes it so that we can endure it.
Yeah. There's certainly a genetic component. I've heard somebody say like, if you're a pitcher in the majors, you've been touched by God. That's what a friend of mine said to me. But I think about what you're saying all the time. And I used to take my son to a pitching coach, and he had all his old training manuals. He was in the majors, and they were all like full body machine workouts, 3x12, leg extension, leg curl, leg press, lat pull down behind the neck. Like, oh no, behind the neck, right? The world is going to end. One that was really good was the boxing trainer for Riddick Bowe was somehow the coach for the strength coach for one of his major league teams. And it was like, that would have been the early 90s. And it had things like push up on a physio ball with a pike up, combo and like stir the pot stuff. I was like, whoa, that guy, that was good stuff. But, Nolan Ryan, he probably did distance running and like push-ups. He probably did sit-ups with his hand behind his head, like cranking on his neck, like quote unquote wrong training. Of course, like I said, if you're a pro athlete, you have a genetic advantage, no doubt about it. But I think about what you're saying a lot, Sean, with this quote unquote incorrect training that leads to amazing results. And here we are with all these, great training methods. But I do think it's the fact that there's no multi-sport, that kind of athlete is so rare unless you're in a small school like near Maine. And I wonder if it's near you too, like these beach towns. The schools are so small that the football players are often wrestlers and baseball players. Like they need to get kids from other sports or they can't field a full team.
My sister coaches lacrosse. And that's
a massive sport now. Massive.
Especially here. Yeah. And she had two girls got recruited to top 5 schools last year from her team. And both of them play different sports outside of lacrosse season. And like she advises all of her kids to do it. She's like, look, pick up your stick if you want, but you should be playing soccer. You should be playing basketball, because when you're playing those other sports, you learn how to see things differently. You learn how to adapt, to a stimulus differently. There's only 5 of us. It's a different mental acumen than when there's 11 kids on the field. Well, what happens now when we're running down on a fast break and it's 5-on-5 or something along those lines, right? So playing in these other sports gives you the opportunity to actually be more present, I think, when you're in the sport.
You're developing a different set of communication skills. You're developing different athleticism. You mentioned like the visual aspect. So in basketball, you're playing with, a smaller number of teammates than if you are soccer or lacrosse. So it improves your visual acuity. Look, as simple as something like, there's things I see happening today that I never saw happen. For example, when kids go to rack a squat bar, they don't know how to use peripheral vision. They don't know how to use like their auditory,
click, drop.
Yeah. Click, that's in. They're looking at one side. I see it all the time. And it's interesting that you said that. And it's like, they don't even know how to use, their eyes.
Well, so you know what? I think that's whenever I hear stuff like that, I think that speaks to a lack of confidence more than because I don't think kids lost peripheral vision, right? But
they don't know how to use.
Right. Because they lack the confidence in their peripheral vision is where I think that goes.
It goes hand in hand. Like you've never done it. So you lack confidence. And that's also why, before somebody puts a bar on their back or does a front squat, we spend a lot of time doing sleds, body weight lunges, body weight squats, dumbbell squats, kettlebell squats, lat, like this whole buildup phase. But guess what? When I was a kid, there was no goblet squat. You put a bar on your back and started squatting. You do that today and kids will fall all over the place because they just lack athleticism, including a high level athlete who didn't, you're a high level athlete does not mean you have athleticism. And dude, I know I bounce around a lot, so I apologize to the listeners, but on Twitter, I was in conversation with coaches and we were talking about how like training is, everybody wants it so perfect. So somebody mentioned at the CSCCA conference, Michael Johnson, who was a gold medal sprinter, said his main exercise was leg curls. Like, oh, it wasn't a deadlift. It wasn't a hang clean. It wasn't a glute ham raise, a Nordic leg curl. It was leg curls, a bodybuilding exercise. So I said, yeah, here's what's interesting. When I went to my first intensive wrestling camp, our coach was a gold medalist, and I think he had won 4 world titles. So he had the next Olympics were coming up in a year or two. So I think he won 2 Olympics and 5 or 6 world titles. He didn't know how to lift weights. We were in a small college weight room. He was doing cable crossovers, but like heaving them up and down. He was doing like half rep curls, but like heaving them. He basically was destroying every machine in his way. And so, yeah, we laughed because it was like, where was like the polar heart rate monitor? Where was the GPS? He just destroyed stuff. And he was a 2-time Olympic champion doing quote unquote wrong training.
Well, Zach, there's a kid local to here who owns a business called Athlete Protocol. And I was with him a few weeks ago, and he was asking me about getting his coaches CSCS or what should they do. And I said, no. I want you to get your coaches, Zach Even-Esh's SSP.
Yeah. Practical.
So, in the last few minutes that we have here, can you tell people about what you're teaching through SSP? Because I think it's a lost art.
Yeah. And so basically it's a plug and play system. So what do we do at the underground? What happens when a new athlete comes in? What does the introductory training session look like? How do we assess them through just simple body weight exercises and make and implement exercises that correct things like poor ankle mobility, poor hip mobility, weak muscles. And then we get into the training methods and the training tools and technique and program design. Because what's interesting is sometimes people watch a lot of YouTube videos and they could kind of regurgitate information, but they don't understand it. Like, why do we sometimes do no squats with an athlete for 3 months? Well, we utilize lunges as a strength stretching exercise. We get their hips and ankles, we get their hips more mobile, their ankles more stable, and we build strong legs through walking lunges, reverse lunges, split squats. We build their back up with, back extensions and hanging abs and chest supported row. And now they're ready for the next level. So SSP stands for Strength and Sports Performance Coach. And so that's really the world we're in. Whereas my initial cert, which is still ongoing, is the Underground Strength Coach cert, which is more pure strength and conditioning. Although in that cert, we have warm-ups and training sessions filmed where you see our athletes like sprinting, jumping, doing modified gymnastics. So SSPC meets really where athletes are today. So it's really focused on athletes. And there's a lot of speed and agility stuff. Why, quote unquote, speed and agility? Because that's what people ask about. If you run a gym, parents never go to you and say, I need my son to get to squat more. They say 2 things. He needs or she needs core strength and speed and agility. And so coaches need to understand how to implement that, as well as understanding, and I get into it in the cert, the psychology of communication. How do I communicate with parents or other coaches who want to hire, come and bring a team to my gym? Back in the day, people would say, listen, you can't do speed and agility until you're strong first. Your daughter, your son has to squat. And I'm like, no. They don't understand our language. So you could agree with them. And now you create a training program that builds not just the body and the performance, but the mind of the athlete. So our trial back in the day with Underground Strength Coach was not what it is today. Today, the kids do some sprinting. They do some low hurdle work. They do quote unquote speed and agility work. We had a dad come in and watched for 5 minutes, and then he signed his son up right away. Want to know why? He was watching us warm up. And I know that when he sees us sprinting and decelerating and cutting, his son's a hockey player. His son wasn't even a field athlete, but guess what he's thinking in his mind? Speed and agility. At the end of all that movement prep, They did V-ups, side plank, hanging abs. Guess what he's seeing? Core strength. I'm using air quotes for those listening. That's what people want. Do they need it? Yes. Do they need a lot of other stuff? Yes. So the SSPC is real powerful, and it could also be implemented at the college level. No offense to some of the college coaches out there, but some college strength coaches are not even 30 years old. I've been training for more than 30 years. So I have a real deep understanding of not just what people want, but what they need. And, business side of things, this is why I've also hired a YouTube videographer, because what we do is really effing awesome. And from an ego standpoint, I want to get it out there. I want more coaches using it.
It's not even, I'll take that one from you. I don't think it's an ego thing. I think it's we need more of it.
Yeah, I believe in it.
And you're pushing against the grain in a lot of ways of like everything needs to be measured. Keep everybody safe all of the time. Nobody gets their feelings hurt. We don't tell this kid he's not doing this well.
That's right.
And you're like, no. If I don't tell this kid he's not doing this well, he's going to think he's doing it well. And then when he gets to the game, he's going to get his ass kicked. And then he's going to look at me and say, why didn't you tell me I was going to get my ass kicked? And I'm going to say, well, I wasn't allowed to because no one wanted me to get your feelings hurt.
That's right. Yeah. And repercussions.
I think I've been following you and watching your stuff long enough to believe that it's less ego and it's more the best thing for these kids is to know the truth.
I want this system, honestly, like implanted in schools around the country. That's what I want it to be. I want remember Bigger, Stronger, Faster, or Bigger, Fat?
Chris Bell.
Yep. The certification I'm talking about, the one that's like, it's squat, bench, clean.
Okay.
And then they have some other, stuff in there. It was real basic. It was popular in the 90s in high schools because football coaches just plugged it in. They had a record board. But, I've trained kids that could, squat 405, deadlift 500, but they can't make it through a practice. And then they're quote unquote always hurt. Hey, you got all the records. You're the strongest bench squat in the school, but you can't run. You can't make it through practice. Your knee hurts, your hamstring hurts. This SSPC is for athletes. It builds athletes for plug in. I'm a swimmer. I'm a basketball player. I play hockey. I wrestle, plug it in and do it. And so, it's the culmination of my training and my coaching. I started coaching in 1995. So that's another story, another day.
It's definitely another story. Zach, I appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Great times, my brother. Thank you for everybody listening.
You're welcome. We'll make sure people know where they can find you in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Active Life Podcast. Please remember, give us a hand, rate it, review it wherever you listen to shows. We are on a mission to humanize the healthcare industry by professionalizing the fitness industry to empower the individual to live a life unlimited by the way that their body looks, feels, or performs. If you are inspired by that mission and want to jump on the wagon, find us anywhere. Active Life Professional on Instagram, Active Life RX on Instagram. Come to me personally at Dr. Sean Pastuch. We want to welcome you onto the train. We want you to be a part of the mission. We want to offer you the opportunity to pursue this right alongside us. We're inspired by your effort, and we hope to help you in your journey. Turn pro.